Let's get rolling. Good afternoon. I hope that you had a good weekend. We are moving right along and we are already in the third week of the term. So we'll go ahead and get started on the stuff for today. As a quick recap, on Friday, we had you all do the survival activity. That's where you were trapped in the wilderness in northern Canada, and you were asked to identify a list of 12 items from order of importance. The purpose of that activity was to help you think about how you have different roles when you're in a group, how you're able to develop effective trust in a group, and develop a set of goals and strategy for small group communication. If you were not here on Friday, I've gone ahead and linked that activity on Canvas so you can check it out in case you're interested about what we did. We also talked a little bit about media and the role of trust and status in group communication. All things we're going to hit on a little bit more as the term continues. As we've talked about, right, trust is challenging when we're in a small group because in a lot of situations, we find ourselves placed with people that we don't really know, that we don't really trust. We worry about social loafing and about people pulling their weight in the group. And we've discussed how there are strategies that we can use to improve our communication in those settings, such as being open to changing our minds, our perspectives, taking responsibility when we mess up, and the impacts that it might have about the group. I wanted to touch a little bit about the small group reflection assignment, right? So that's your first writing assignment for the course. It's pretty short and it's due this Sunday. So to help you to prepare for that, if you would like to send me an optional rough draft or outline, if you get that to me by the end of the day on Friday, I'll be able to return feedback. You don't have to do that, but it's useful if you want to see if you're on the right track so far. Right before class, I posted an announcement on Canvas that includes information about citing. So if you check out the announcements for the course, and you go to APA Cite, the ebook that we're using for the class should be the only thing that you need to cite for your small group reflection, but you should make sure to cite it in MLA, APA, or Chicago. So I've gone ahead and included all the information that you need. This is in APA format, but you're welcome to repurpose this information into MLA or Chicago if you prefer those. So the authors here, the year here, the title of the book, the edition, the publisher. Also means like an in-text citation would look like last name, year, and then a page number if you include a specific page. So I am asking you to cite from the book for this reflection assignment. Make sure that you are citing if you're drawing from something that either is not common knowledge or is not something that comes from your own background, right? So if you are paraphrasing one of the 9 different parts of Belvin's self-perception inventory, it's a good chance to use the citation. So I encourage you to use that to help to bulk out the content of your small group reflection. Remember that this assignment, along with the rubric so that you know how it's going to be graded, is available here. The full prompt is here. It can be in paragraph form. So I'll be looking at that once you turn it in. And in addition to that, you have a couple things coming up in the class. So the week number 2 quiz, I extended out the deadline. That is due by the end of the day this Wednesday. And then you also have the week number 3 quiz that'll be due on Sunday and go over the stuff from that week. So just so you know, those things are coming up. Again, if you're running into any issues with completing the small group reflection, picking out a group you'd like to focus on, or figuring out how to address the prompts, let me know and I'm happy to help. Before we get started on new stuff for today, any questions about anything we talked about last class, anything about the reflection or anything else? Great. So we'll be talking about today, right? Active listening is a good idea. There is no such thing as a bad question. So I'm always happy to address questions, even if you feel like you're silly. So this week, we are starting to look at the role of listening and effective communication when we're in small groups, right? If you have taken, we offer a course at EOU, I believe it's called 295, called Are You Listening? That is very focused on the listening process, developing good listening skills. The best course you're interested in, it gets into those things in more detail, but listening is important. We talk about it in a lot of communication classes, and listening is a thing that is highly sought after from employers. It's something we have to do in a lot of contexts, but listening is one of those things that we feel like we're better at than we actually are. There's a lot of dynamics of effective listening, including the complications of listening in group settings that we'll be going over more today. We'll be discussing and doing an activity that relates to utilizing effective listening skills in small groups. So we'll be looking in some of this information in more detail. So I think it's useful to start by defining listening, right? Listening is, if you think about it, when we're in small groups, what we're going to be doing the majority of the time, right? When we're in a small group setting, you could think about maybe there's 6 people, and on average, right, you are a sixth of the time actually speaking in the group. Rest of the time you're listening, and oftentimes, right, if you're not the leader or facilitator of a group, your share of talking relative to listening is going to be even less, because the leader of the group is going to do more of the talking. So listening is an important skill for us to develop in group settings. It's what we do the majority of the time, and it's something that helps us to work more effectively in groups, right? So listening is more than just picking up vibrations in your ears, right? Listening is also about how we're taking in the message, how we're using the message, how we're responding to the message, and so forth, right? We imagine somebody, right? Somebody's talking and the other person is on their phone, right? We know that perhaps the noises are entering their ears, but they're not really listening. And we know that because of how they're expressing themselves non-verbally. They're not paying attention because they're on their phone, right? They're doing something else. And as a result, we can't consider that to fully be active listening. So listening is about more than just picking up on what's going on in your ears, but starts out with this idea of understanding, right? Do we know what the message is trying to say? And that's as simple as, do we know the language? Do we know the words that the person is using? We understand the context in which somebody is speaking, right? So if they talk about drafting school, are they talking about art or are they talking about the military, right? We have words that have multiple meanings. We understand the correct meanings for those circumstances, right? And understanding is also using nonverbal communication. If somebody says, it's so great to see you, and they're saying it in a sarcastic tone of voice, are we understanding the true meaning behind what they're saying? Evaluating the message, right, means judging the message, determining if the message is true or correct or makes sense. If somebody says, oh yeah, I'm doing okay, but they seem really stressed out and tense, you can tell they're just saying that and they're not doing well, that's an evaluation of the message, right? Or there's another spam email, like phishing scam that's going around today that asks people to enter their email addresses for all the universities they've attended. You start to look at this form that they're asking you to fill out and you realize, okay, you're not really supposed to be putting in your passwords for your email addresses for EOU on this Google form. You're also not, you're noticing as you're filling out the form that there's material that's spelled incorrectly, and you know, your BS detector goes off. That's a way of evaluating a message in the listening process. Recalling is your ability to pick up on information later, right? So I had folks in my last class who were coming in with flashcards because they had an exam for another class. So your ability to remember, to go back to something is important. I'll give you a tip. This is something I always bring up in conflict management. So whenever you find yourself in a difficult conversation or conflict with somebody else and you find the conflict is starting to get heated, one of the best ways to troubleshoot and defuse the conversation is to ask the other person and have them to ask you to paraphrase their perspective on the topic, right? So one thing that happens a lot is as we get into disagreements with other people, we start to misunderstand or mischaracterize their point of view on something, right? We're too busy expressing our own concerns that we don't really fully hear what their concerns are. If somebody can do a good job of recalling and explaining their perspective on something to you. Vice versa, there's a good chance you're better able to work through the conflict. Or if you're disagreeing, right, you're disagreeing over doing chores and you're expressing your concerns about your roommates not doing the chores that they need to, and they don't seem like they're understanding or paraphrasing what you're saying, that's a communication problem that is going to be a precursor to being able to solve the larger issue. So ask people to paraphrase if you're disagreeing. And then feedback, right? Feedback can be both verbal and nonverbal. So feedback, one of the easiest ways is by providing nonverbal communication, such as nodding, such as eye contact. We also use verbal feedback, say yes, I understand, perhaps asking a question, right? Listening is involved in responding back to the messages that we receive. Right? Fake listening, pseudo listening is oftentimes identified by people using verbal and nonverbal feedback at inappropriate times. So maybe this person over here is talking and this person on their phone is pseudo listening and they say yeah or in the middle of a sentence in a way that doesn't match up with what the other person is saying. So there's challenges in effective listening. So I think one of the important things to understand in effective group communication is the role of active listening too, right? So active listening is an important skill for us to develop as we're working in group settings, right? Active listening involves being attentive and present. So it means understanding some of the factors that might impact your ability to fully engage going into a meeting, right? Group meetings can be exhausting and challenging to navigate. One of the reasons that they're difficult is because we're having to pick up on messages from very different speakers, very different situations, and discussing topics that might not be directly relevant to us at every single moment. So coming into the meetings, understanding how we're doing physiologically, psychologically, socially, if there's an agenda or a way we can brief ourselves before a meeting, that can be really useful too. Active listening means thinking non-verbally, right? So it's kind of, if you're familiar with Michel Foucault's idea of the panopticon, right? The panopticon is the idea of the fear or anxiety that you could be observed at any given time, even if you're not in that moment, right? He imagines it as like a circular prison with a warden who's stationed right in the middle, right? The prisoners are in the circle. They don't know if the warden is watching them at that time, but they could be watching them. Another way of thinking about this is kind of like if you're driving, right? You might avoid speeding or speeding too much because, not because there is a police officer at that moment, but that there could be, right in the middle of the turnaround on the freeway. So that's one way of thinking about the challenge of listening in a group setting, is that other people might be watching or listening to you or noticing your nonverbal reactions, even if you're not speaking and you might not know it, right? People tend to look at different people in the room. People move around, right? If they are paying attention to you at any moment, then they'll see how you might or might not be listening. So I think assume that people might be watching you at any time and develop your nonverbal communication with that in mind. Active listening is avoiding interruption, right? So there are contexts where interruption is appropriate and makes a lot of sense. Perhaps you're in a Zoom meeting and your professor does not have their microphone on, they're muted, right? It's a good opportunity to interrupt and use the chat or something similar to make sure that they know and can stop doing that. And that's assuming they know how to use the chat. But interruption is generally something you should avoid, especially because there's less real estate and time for each individual person to speak. People can feel especially slighted if they don't have that opportunity to express their perspective with the limited time that they do have. Active listeners are more concerned about the message over the sound of their voice. We might think back to dominators and credit seekers, people who like to hear their own voice and like to make a group setting about them, right? It's not so much about expressing your own view or signaling your own view about something as much as it is providing a message that contributes to and adds to the topic, right? So paying attention to what the message the person is saying is an important component of effective group communication. Paraphrase, right? As mentioned, paraphrasing is stating back the message to somebody else. Paraphrasing is really useful at diffusing conflict, and it's also really useful to make sure a message is fully understood. Again, one really useful practice is taking minutes for a meeting where you're able to document what happened in that meeting, regardless of what the meeting is about. If there's some like communication or you have to reach an agreement about something, that can be really useful. I'll give you a tip. If you ever have to do a group project for a class, right? Take minutes from that meeting. And if somebody is not doing their part or there's an issue that happened in the meeting, right? You got some minutes to show them so that you can show what went well or didn't as they're looking at your grade. And then clarifying questions, right? There are no bad questions. It's a great idea to ask questions to better understand what's going on. In fact, if you are trying to make a good impression, maybe early on into a new job, into a new club, activity, group, into a new class, anything, right? Clarifying questions that are engaged with the content, but ask like maybe thinking a step further are a really, really useful way to create a good impression and to show people that you are paying attention, that you're interested, that you care. And even if you're asking a clarifying question that's been stated earlier or might seem silly, right? A lot of people would rather have you ask that question and have that mentally resolved for you than to have you go on perhaps misunderstanding something. So clarifying questions are really useful. And oftentimes, right, people respond to a clarifying question by thinking, maybe I didn't communicate this the way that I should have, and clarifying helps me to explain that better. So active listening is important. I wanted to share a video that I think does a good job of discussing some of the components and elements of effective active listening as well.
Of our lives, we have worked or will work within group research, from our homes to the playground and from classrooms to boardrooms. We will be a part of groups of individuals working together towards a common goal. Ideally, we would all want this experience to be a good one, where everyone gets along and works well together. Unfortunately, that is not always the case. Have you ever spoken to someone and were not sure if they understood you? They seem to just nod, but something tells you they may have missed the point. You were willing to explain further, but since you don't want to come across as condescending, we're just waiting to be asked. Or have you ever been in a situation at home, school, or work where someone or several people were speaking to you, but unfortunately your mind was somewhere else and you were not really paying a whole lot of attention? These situations may be familiar to all of you. The common thread across those scenarios was that someone was not actively listening. Active listening is a key ingredient in effective group communication. This lesson will explore what active listening is, the importance of active listening, and the 5 steps of active listening, as well as common mistakes made within that process. Let's start by defining what exactly it is we mean when we say active listening. Active listening is a multi-step process that allows a listener to repeatedly ask for clarification from the speaker to truly understand what was said. Let's see how that's done. Oh, hi Salma. Hi Ahmed. I submitted my draft last week, but there are a few incomplete sections that need more research data that I'm waiting from my team. Also, I'd love for you to take a look at what I have and comment on the quality of my arguments and analysis. So let me understand if I understood you. You submitted the draft, which some sections that are waiting data from your research team. Also, you'd like me to review your work, particularly focusing on the quality of your arguments and analysis. Is that correct? Exactly.
So kind of silly example, but I think a good way of thinking about the process of effective active listening, right? That active listening is about creating space for clarifying questions, really focusing on full comprehension of the message, allowing the details and supporting material to be understood by the other person, and so forth. So active listening, good thing for us to do in groups. So there's a lot of different challenges that can impact how we engage in group listening. And you've likely encountered these yourselves when you've been put in group settings. So one of the ways that we can address some of these challenges involve offering people specific time to share, to reflect, and to engage on an issue. We don't want to assume perhaps there's a challenging issue or prompt that people are trying to work through in a group, that they're going to be able to understand that information right away, right? So giving people the chance to take in information, perhaps giving them a few minutes to come up with ideas or brainstorm is a useful way to make sure that a message is being fully comprehended. Also offering people the chance, if they have questions, to raise the questions, they need clarification, if they need to review from the previous meeting, that's a good way to give people that time. Avoiding interruption, as mentioned, is important. Again, the real estate for group meeting is generally a lot less. Withholding judgment, right? So oftentimes when we come into group settings, we're coming in with stereotypes and expectations about other people and about how they might communicate. Sometimes we rush to think what that person is going to say or what their perspective is, or we like mentally finish their sentence for them. But giving people the opportunity to speak their mind and share their perspective earlier on is an important way that we can address some of the biases that we might bring to the table. Being accepting, right, of other people, including people from different backgrounds and such. Maybe there's somebody who's a lot newer, who's less familiar with groups, but has great ideas. Maybe there's a more experienced member of the group who has a lot of wisdom about the experience and history. That's important. Showing that you understand the messages, again, using those clarifying responses, paraphrasing responses, and so on is really useful. There's a strategy that I think is especially helpful if there's conflict or challenge in the group. I'm sure that many of you have been in a group, like a class or a setting in which somebody has said or done something that you found to be disrespectful, inappropriate, it sets you off. Maybe it's something that you disagree with socially, culturally, or politically, right? It can be very easy for us to have this instantaneous response in our head where we want to call them out or respond and address, the thing that they said and disagree with it. And there are contexts where that's useful, but most of the time, abiding by the idea of the Jefferson rule is a really good strategy. The Jefferson rule is where you count to 10 in your head once you've heard something that sets you off, and you wait to finish counting to 10 before you respond to the message. That does two things. First of all, it means that the response that you give, if you decide to give a response to that message, is a lot more measured, is a lot more persuasive, and comes across as less reactive. And second of all, you might realize that you have a response that you really disagree with, but you think that sharing that response isn't going to be appropriate or make sense in that moment. So giving yourself the chance to filter out and react in a way that might escalate a problem versus figuring out if it makes more sense to wait is a strategy that you can use too. And respect is built over time, right? We don't immediately trust other people, therefore we're less likely to listen to them. But as we develop rapport, we start to work with them a little bit more, we feel a greater sense of respect. So there's been a lot of research into why it is that group meetings have been challenging places for people to listen, especially online, right? A lot of people who have been involved in Zoom, right, or similar online communication over COVID have expressed Zoom fatigue, that being in these kinds of virtual meetings really gets exhausting over time. And studies have actually identified some of the major causes of Zoom fatigue. And in group meetings especially, the reason why these meetings have been really challenging is because our brains, right, are picking up on nonverbal communication. They're picking up on the three-dimensional space of our eye contact, our facial expressions, our proximity, our physicality, all those things that help us to understand fully what it is that somebody is saying. But compare that to the little Brady Bunch boxes that you get over Zoom. All of a sudden, you have all of these little rectangles with all of these different nonverbal communicators, and it's difficult to even pay attention to and understand somebody's nonverbal response when it's in this little box that's a two-dimensional space. The lighting, perhaps the audio quality is not the greatest, and you see all of these spaces at once. Versus if you're looking around, you're identifying one section of the group, another section, and you're kind of moving around, right? Your field of vision is not covering everything in the way that it would on a computer screen. So the challenge that we have with understanding messages and kind of working overtime to understand nonverbal communication is one of the reasons that we get more tired in group meetings happening online. But this also happens face to face, right? We have more people to listen to and pay attention to. We have to kind of mentally switch gears if people talk in different ways, right? Their tone of voice, their accent is a little bit different. We have to adjust to those. You might have less knowledge on certain topics, right? It's easy to drift away and lose focus if people are talking about something in a group meeting that we're less experienced with or that's not as directly relevant to us, right? So that can be a challenge to know when to tune out and when to tune back in. Engagement in the group can change over time, right? So sometimes people are talking a lot about a certain topic and then they move to do something else entirely and then they're taking a break. It can be difficult to keep pace with how a group changes over time. In fact, as we'll be talking about later, groups are usually the most productive when they're right up against their deadline. And so thinking about how groups change and their pace over time is an important thing for us to look at too. There's less opportunity to influence other people, right? So again, we have less time to say our piece in a group. So we really take more time to prepare and fine tune our message so that when we do speak, we're making the best use of our time. That also ties itself here to the challenge of listening, right? Because when we're listening to other people in a group setting, that's time that we don't get to speak, right? If we think about interpersonal communication face-to-face, generally speaking, it's 50-50 between you and the other person, right? You're listening half the time, you're talking the other half of the time, give or take. But in a group setting, since you're not talking as much, you're going to take more time to prepare and anticipate when you do get to speak, perhaps less time to really focus on listening to other people. You might daydream or, again, drift away, especially because you have less of a need to speak as actively when you're a part of the group, especially if you're less of an active member of the group. And then there's a greater chance of social loading, right? So bystander effect has been studied a lot in psychology. The bystander effect is the idea that say you're walking down the street and you see somebody who's getting mugged, right? If that's happening and you're the only person that you can see in the street, you're probably very likely to either, if you're feeling brave, like cut off the mugging that's happening or to call 911, right? But if you're in a very crowded street and you see a lot of other people around you, you're less likely to call or respond to it because you think somebody else is going to do it, right? So that approach translates to group communication too. Chances are, if you're in a really big classroom and you have a teacher who wants a volunteer, right? You're less likely to get somebody to raise your hand than in a smaller group because you think that it's more likely that somebody else will do that. So when you're in a group setting, you're more likely to not participate or share your perspective because perhaps somebody else could fill out in the Slack and volunteer themselves rather than you, right? So that could be one challenge of working effectively in group settings. We all have folks that we worked with in groups who have not fully done the work or participated in the group, and social loafing is a phenomenon that helps explain it. But when we listen well in groups, there's a lot of really good things that can happen, right? We have more time to understand and make sense of what other people are saying, right? Because we're talking less of the time, we have more opportunity to really fully understand what other people are saying before we need to speak up ourselves. There's more perspectives and ideas, right? There are more people speaking and participating in the group. So you get more variation and you get out-of-the-box solutions. Perhaps you're planning a birthday party. Somebody says, oh, it should be Disney themed. Another person says, oh, we could get this cake from this store. Oh, we could get these candles from over here, right? You snowball ideas and develop solutions as you're working together as part of a larger group that you couldn't on your own through listening to each other and developing on each other's ideas a bit. So there's a lot of good things that can happen. A good example of how listening is impacted in group settings. So we have seen a lot of jobs that have moved remote, but jobs that involve the use of some type of office or office space or place to commute have more frequently been using more of an open plan, right? An open space rather than giving people their separate cubicles and separated spaces. The use of common spaces has become more common because it allows for more open communication, right? If you have desks that are more openly situated, tables where people can naturally work together, there's a greater incentive for people to communicate with each other in a group setting. So the use of physicality of space and place matters too when we're thinking about listening and engaging with one another. We have more opportunity to do that when we have greater physical proximity to other people. So what I'm going to have us do now is a group activity. And by the way, in this class, we're going to be doing a number of group activities like the one we did last week with the survival activity. And then later on in the term, I'll be asking you to reflect on some of these group activities for one of your assignments in the class. So it's just an opportunity for you to start to pay attention to how you're communicating and participating in some of these group programs. So I'm going to be splitting you into two groups, and I'm going to ask each group to take some time to share their perspective on the topic. How has social media impacted your relationships? Has it brought you closer together or further apart? And what I really want you to do as you're listening to each other share your perspectives and build off of each other's perspectives is to really take note of active listening, to really try to listen and take notes on the points that are raised by specific people in the group. So you don't need to turn in this part, but you are going to be using this part to complete your attendance activity for today. So let's go ahead and do one over here on this side. So we'll do a group of 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and 6 here on this side. Do 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, and 7 here on this side. So take some time to move into your group, share your perspective, and make sure everybody in the group has the chance to chat. And then once you've done that, I will show you the second part that you'll be doing for your attendance for the day. So I'm asking the folks in the group to work on this question and just chat amongst each other about it. Yeah, share your perspective on it.
Okay, so how has social media impacted your relationships? Has brought you together or further apart? I guess we'll do our names. Okay. We'll write our thoughts down on it and then kind of go over it. Okay, yeah, so I'm Gabe. I'd say probably from a little more distances, people can be a little more distracted in you know, more engaged with those or distant friends than type thing. So let's play some. Do it. Everybody has to register or one person.
You're just practicing. I think sometimes like when you are like with your friends or something in a group, and you're all hanging out. Sometimes I think right now
Yeah.
uncomfortable or like it's something engaging with people. I think that it's just when you are all together, it can differ to when you like it's kind of awkward. Instantly you're going so.
Not every day. I think so. It's good. There's really only times that you cannot communicate. Most of the time, it's not. We're together.
I know I like it my feelings sort of like spending meaningful time with people and having fun. I know what that is. I value my time with that, so.
Overall, it's beneficial.
You can't always tell. It's also very dangerous, right? And pretty much everyone's. So here, I'd say, yeah. Yes, so like your friends are posting.
My name's Devon. As for how like you is, I would say closer. Because like in my situation, I would just like this, or all my friends are like, oh my god, it's very easy to put them down. I feel like all because they're not the standard.
It's supposed to be able to. I think that has like definitely divided society and like we're on the part on the
Wow.
is like it definitely divides society. You see all
Oh,
the
no. Tropics.
Yeah. Yeah. Sometimes it's hard to like this stuff.
For example, usually West Cape, usually the front, and then some other issues from medicals as well. Because all my friends are like negatives, trying to stop on board. And I would put out something you don't get really to see it, but I did get to this.
That's nice to meet you.
And I see that.
No, but
And that's not really important, so my mom should. Oh.
And I really think it was definitely positive and it was. I got rid of fever. I just excited for so long. I had a hundred.
Yeah.
I know like when I have like nothing to do, like I just like.
I have to.
I'm like, oh, I have nothing to do, just chill out. and just, Yeah.
Yeah.
It also would be probably on social media. Yeah, for sure.
I don't think I've ever gotten to the point where I didn't immediately, but I read that hard. And when they expect you to like. It's annoying, and then when you don't do it, it's like. You can bring. I'm like, come on.
I feel like I don't feel like this is the top. I'm not wrong. I only use it.
Yeah, that's the same way. I find it really annoying when you're like, hey, man, Brent, and you just play it on the phone full time on social media or something, because it's just like, why are we hanging out if you're just gonna play on the phone anyway? You know?
Yeah, on the social media and your phone also has a lot of like your mental health and stuff. Yeah, anxiety or people use it as like a block or it can also increase your anxiety.
I'm sorry, I didn't catch your name.
It's one.
Or, okay. Yeah. Social media for me is like, I don't know if anybody will, but I don't think these players and obviously I can see them. They're using them. Since they're something. It's you. Okay. Yeah, okay. I was like, yeah. Yeah, I go.
like most folks are done here. So when you finish your conversations in your groups for part 2 of your attendance, I'm going to ask you, you can write or type this to turn in, to summarize the perspectives of each of the members in your group about this topic. What was the perspective that each person in the group shared? Second of all, take some time to observe what you noticed about your own listening. What went well, what didn't, what did you all do? And then lastly, take some time to think about how you might improve upon your own listening in small groups. So I'll give you some time to work on this. You can write or type, and I'll ask you to turn that in just a little bit. Give you a couple more minutes here to finish up. So go ahead and wrap up. So as you're working through this and finishing up, continue to be thinking about how you're listening in groups, right? When you're thinking about the perspectives of other group members, sometimes there's a challenge to remember exactly what everybody said or to get everybody's names down. You can always use confirming, clarification, and follow-up questions to make sure that you have what they said down. Thinking about your own listening and what went well, you might pay attention to your nonverbal communication, your recall, the way that you were able to understand messages. As we think about listening, right, what were the things that kind of left in the gaps? We're not going to get everything down word for word as we're listening to other people, but as we have the chance more to listen in group settings, it's a skill we can continue to work on. So to wrap up for today, we talked about listening and small group communications and the challenges and some of the ways that listening can help us to improve as well. So next class, we'll be looking at skills in listening and communicating effectively in small groups. So please pass forward or email if you haven't done so already with your attendance prompt for the day. Have a great rest of your afternoon, and I'll see you again on Wednesday.